Part 1. The Impossible Arrival. My name is Detective William Collins, and I've been investigating aviation incidents and airport security breaches for the Federal Aviation Administration for 9 years. I've dealt with hijackings, smuggling operations, and every kind of fraud imaginable in the airline industry. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on November 7th, when transatlantic Flight 914 landed at JFK International Airport with 12 passengers who shouldn't exist. The call came at 11:43 p.m., just as I was finishing paperwork at my office. Captain Richard Hayes from Airport Security sounded shaken, which was unusual for a man who'd spent 30 years dealing with every crisis airports could produce. "Detective Collins, we have a situation at Terminal 4. You need to get here immediately. And Emma." This one is going to sound insane. 20 minutes later, I arrived at the terminal to find it cordoned off by security. 24 uniformed officers surrounded Gate 47, and I could see confused passengers being held in a separated area, their faces showing a mixture of irritation and fear. Captain Hayes met me at the security perimeter, his expression grim. "Flight 914 from London Heathrow landed 40 minutes ago. Standard transatlantic flight. 287 passengers and 12 crew according to the manifest. Routine landing, no issues during flight." So what's the problem? When we did the passenger count during deplaning, we had 289 passengers and 12 crew. That's 12 extra people, Emma. 12 passengers who weren't on the manifest, who didn't board in London, who somehow appeared during a 7-hour flight over the Atlantic Ocean. I felt my investigator instincts immediately going on high alert. Stowaways. Someone hiding in cargo, who made it to the passenger cabin. That was our first thought. But these aren't stowaways. They have boarding passes, printed tickets from London Heathrow with seat assignments. They have passports, luggage, everything a normal passenger would have. And they're not confused or hiding. They walked off the plane like any other passenger, expecting to clear customs and go home. He led me to a secure interrogation room where the 12 extra passengers were being held. They sat in chairs, looking bewildered and increasingly angry at being detained. I studied them carefully. 6 men, 6 women, ranging in age from mid-20s to late 50s. They looked like ordinary travelers, business attire, casual clothing, carry-on bags, phones in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, showing my full credentials, "I'm Detective Emma Collins. I understand you're confused about why you're being detained. I need to ask you some questions about your flight today." A woman in her 30s, wearing a business suit, stood up indignantly. "This is absurd. We've been sitting here for almost an hour with no explanation. I have a connecting flight to catch, and I demand to know why we're being treated like criminals." "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Sarah Mitchell. I flew from London on transatlantic 914, same as everyone else. I have my ticket, my passport, everything." "Why are we being singled out?" I pulled up the flight manifest on my tablet. "Ms. Mitchell, your name doesn't appear on the passenger list for Flight 914. According to our records, you weren't booked on this flight." "That's impossible. I made the reservation 3 weeks ago. I have my confirmation number right here." She pulled out her phone and showed me a booking confirmation. It looked legitimate. Transatlantic Airlines header, her name, seat to 7C, departure time, everything. I checked the manifest again. Seat to 7C was listed as occupied by James Patterson, a businessman from New York. According to our records, seat to 7C was assigned to someone else. "Then your records are wrong," she said firmly. "I sat into 7C the entire flight. Ask anyone around me, they saw me there." I looked at the other 11 passengers. They all had similar stories: valid tickets, confirmed seats, normal boarding procedures, but none of their names appeared on the official manifest. Captain Hayes pulled me aside. "We've been checking with Transatlantic's booking system. These ticket numbers exist in their database, but they were issued 5 years ago for a flight that crashed." My blood ran cold. "What flight?" Transatlantic Flight 702, London to New York, November 7, 2018. It crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. All 287 passengers and 12 crew were killed. There were no survivors. I felt the room spin slightly. Are you saying these 12 people were on that crashed flight? Their ticket numbers match passengers from Flight 702. Same seat assignments, same booking details, just 5 years later. Emma, we pulled up the passenger manifest from that crash. Look at this. He showed me his tablet. The Flight 702 manifest from 2018 listed all the names of our 12 extra passengers. Sarah Mitchell, seat to 7C. David Chen, seat 14A. Rebecca Foster, seat 31F. All 12 of them had been on that doomed flight 5 years ago. This has to be a mistake, I said. Identity theft. Someone using the names and information of crash victims. We thought that too. But we ran their fingerprints and facial recognition. Emma, they match. These aren't people pretending to be the crash victims. According to every biometric system we have, these are the crash victims. People who died 5 years ago. I looked through the glass at the 12 passengers, sitting in that room, completely unaware of what we'd discovered. They thought they'd just arrived from London on a routine flight. They had no idea they were apparently ghosts, people who died half a decade ago. I need to interview them, separately, one at a time. Find out what they remember about their flight, their lives, everything. Over the next 3 hours, I spoke with each of the 12 passengers individually. Their stories were remarkably consistent and deeply disturbing. Sarah Mitchell remembered boarding Flight 914 in London that morning. She'd attended a business conference, was heading home to her apartment in Manhattan, planned to see her sister tomorrow. When I asked her what year it was, she said 2023 without hesitation. Ms. Mitchell, what do you remember about your life before this trip? Your job, your family. I'm a marketing director at Zenith Corporation. I've been there for 3 years. My sister Emma lives in Brooklyn. My parents are in Connecticut. I'm not married, no kids. Why are you asking these questions? What about November 7th, 2018? Do you remember anything about that date? She thought for a moment. That was 5 years ago. I think I was living in Boston then, working for a different company. Why? What does that have to do with anything? Do you remember a flight? Transatlantic Flight 702. Her face went pale. The crash. Yes, everyone remembers that. It was all over the news. Terrible tragedy. All those people killed. But what does that have to do with me, Ms. Mitchell? You were one of those people. You were a passenger on Flight 702. Your name is on the manifest. You died in that crash 5 years ago. She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. That's insane. I'm obviously not dead. I'm sitting right here. There must be a mistake with the records. But when I showed her the crash manifest, showed her the memorial website with her photo and obituary, showed her news articles about the recovery efforts that listed her among the deceased, her confidence began to crack. This is impossible, she whispered. I remember the past 5 years. I remember my job, my apartment, trips I've taken, people I've met. How can I remember things that happened after I supposedly died? The other 11 passengers had similar reactions. None of them remembered the crash. They all insisted they'd boarded Flight 914 that morning in London, just like any other flight. When shown evidence that they'd died 5 years ago, they became confused, angry, or terrified. David Chen, a software engineer, simply repeated this is impossible over and over. Rebecca Foster, a nurse, started crying and demanded to call her husband. Michael Torres, a teacher, refused to believe any of it, insisting we were playing some kind of cruel prank. But the evidence was undeniable. Biometrics confirmed their identities. Their fingerprints matched records from 5 years ago. Their faces matched photos from before the crash. Even DNA samples, taken from families of crash victims who'd provided them for identification purposes, matched. These 12 people were definitely the same individuals who died in 2018, but they were also definitely alive, sitting in interrogation rooms, with 5 years of memories that shouldn't exist. I called in specialists, forensic experts, psychologists, medical examiners. Everyone who looked at the evidence came to the same impossible conclusion. These people were who they claimed to be, and they had died 5 years ago, and they were somehow alive now with no memory of their deaths. Dr. Patricia Morrison, a psychiatrist specializing in trauma and memory disorders, interviewed several of the passengers. Detective Collins, their memories appear completely genuine. These aren't false memories or implanted experiences. When I test their recall of the past 5 years, they have detailed, consistent, emotionally authentic memories. They remember specific events, personal interactions, sensory details. Either they actually lived these past 5 years, or they have been given the most perfect artificial memories ever created. Could this be a hoax? I asked. Some kind of elaborate scheme. To what end? These people aren't asking for anything. They're not trying to claim insurance money or reclaim their old lives. They're just trying to go home from what they think was a normal flight. If this is a hoax, it's the most purposeless and elaborate one in history. Captain Hayes was coordinating with the airline and federal authorities. Emma, we've got another problem. The families of these crash victims have been notified of their deaths. They've held funerals, collected life insurance, moved on with their lives. Some have remarried. Sarah Mitchell's sister Emma got married 2 years ago and has a daughter. Rebecca Foster's husband remarried 6 months ago. What do we tell these families? Sorry, your dead loved one isn't actually dead. And then there was an even bigger problem. I was reviewing the passenger manifest for Flight 914, the flight that had just landed. Checking who was supposed to be in the seats our 12 extra passengers claimed they'd occupied. Those seats were marked as occupied by different people. 12 passengers who had boarded in London, been recorded on the manifest, and should have deplaned at JFK. Captain, I said slowly, where are the 12 passengers who were supposed to be in those seats? The ones actually booked on Flight 914. His expression told me he'd already realized the problem. We don't know. They boarded in London. They were on the plane during flight, but they never deplaned here. 12 passengers seem to have vanished during the flight, and 12 crash victims from 5 years ago appeared in their place. That's impossible. So are people returning from the dead. But here we are. I needed to talk to the flight crew, pilots, attendants, anyone who might have noticed something unusual during the flight. The pilots, Captain James Wilson and First Officer Sarah Park, were as baffled as everyone else. The flight was completely routine, Wilson insisted. 7 hours from London to New York, normal weather, no turbulence, no incidents. We landed on schedule, taxied to the gate, standard procedure all the way. Did you notice anything unusual about the passengers? Any disturbances, strange behavior? Nothing. The cabin was quiet most of the flight. It was a night departure. Most people slept. The attendants did normal service. Everything was by the book. The flight attendants told similar stories. Everything had been normal. They'd served meals, checked on passengers, handled the usual minor requests. No one had seen anything unusual. When you did your passenger count, I asked the chief flight attendant, did you notice you had extra people? She looked uncomfortable. We count occupied seats, not individual passengers against the manifest. As long as everyone's seated and belted, we don't verify names. We had a full flight, 289 occupied seats. That matched what we expected. So we proceeded normally. So the 12 extra passengers could have appeared at any point during the flight, and you wouldn't have noticed. I suppose so. But detective, how could passengers appear on a plane in flight? Where would they come from? That was the question that kept circling in my mind. The plane had been 35,000 feet in the air, traveling 550 miles per hour. There was no way for people to board during flight. No secret compartments large enough to hide 12 adults. No explanation for how crash victims from 5 years ago could suddenly manifest in seats that had been occupied by different passengers. At 3 a.m., exhausted and no closer to answers, I decided to try a different approach. I brought all 12 extra passengers together in a conference room. I know this situation is confusing and frightening, I told them, but I need you all to work with me. Think back to your flight today. Everything you remember from the moment you boarded in London until you deplaned here. Any detail, no matter how small or insignificant it seems. They began comparing notes. Sarah remembered boarding, finding her seat, stowing her carry-on. David remembered the takeoff, working on his laptop during the flight. Rebecca remembered having dinner, watching a movie, falling asleep. But then something interesting emerged. They all remembered a moment, roughly 4 hours into the flight, where they'd experienced something strange. It was like the lights flickered, Sarah said. Just for a second. And I felt dizzy, disoriented, like the plane had hit turbulence, but there was no turbulence. I remember that too, David agreed. I thought I was just tired, that I dozed off for a moment. But you're right, there was this weird feeling. Like everything went fuzzy for a few seconds. All 12 of them remembered this moment. A brief period of disorientation, maybe 15 or 20 seconds, where they felt strange. After that, everything had continued normally. They'd finished their flight, landed, deplaned. What if that's when it happened, Doctor? Morrison suggested. What if that moment of disorientation was when they transitioned from whatever state they were into this reality? Transition from where? They claim they boarded in London this morning, which was hours before that moment. Yes, but what if their memories of boarding and the first part of the flight are false? Or what if they were somehow not fully present until that moment? It sounded like science fiction, but then again, so did people returning from the dead. I contacted London Heathrow's security office, requesting surveillance footage from that morning's boarding of Flight 914. While waiting for the files to transfer, I reviewed everything we knew. 12 passengers on Flight 914 with tickets and memories that seemed real, but who matched crash victims from 5 years ago. 12 different passengers who'd boarded in London but never deplaned in New York. A moment of strange disorientation mid-flight that all 12 extra passengers remembered. None of it made sense. But somewhere in this impossible situation, there had to be an explanation, and I was going to find it. My computer pinged. The surveillance footage from Heathrow had arrived. I pulled it up and began watching the boarding process for Flight 914 from that morning. Passengers filed down the jetway, scanned their boarding passes, entered the plane. Normal, routine, nothing unusual. And then I saw them. Sarah Mitchell, David Chen, Rebecca Foster, all 12 of our extra passengers, clear as day on the surveillance footage, boarding the plane in London. But there was something wrong, something off about how they moved, how they looked. I couldn't quite identify it at first, but watching the footage in slow motion, I finally saw it. They cast no shadows. The lighting in the jetway threw shadows from every other passenger. But our 12 extra passengers moved through the lit corridor without casting any shadows at all. As if they weren't really there. As if they were ghosts, apparitions, people who died 5 years ago trying to come home. Part 2. The ghost passengers. I spent the rest of the night reviewing that surveillance footage, from every angle available. Multiple cameras had captured our 12 passengers boarding Flight 914 in London. And in every single frame, they appeared slightly wrong. No shadows, yes. But also something else. I finally identified. They never appeared in reflective surfaces. When other passengers walked past windows or polished metal surfaces, their reflections were visible. But our 12 passengers left no reflections at all. They were there, but they weren't quite real. By 7 a.m., I'd assembled a crisis team in a secure conference room at JFK. Captain Hayes, Dr. Morrison, Federal Aviation officials, and representatives from Transatlantic Airlines. We reviewed the evidence together, and the implications became increasingly disturbing. if we're accepting that these 12 people are somehow the actual crash victims from 2018, said Director Margaret Chen from the FAR, then we need to consider what that means. Are they alive? Dead? Something in between? Their vital signs are normal, Dr. Morrison reported. We've had medical staff examine them. They have heartbeats, they breathe, they have normal blood pressure and temperature. By every physiological measure, they're alive and healthy. But they cast no shadows and have no reflections, I added. They somehow appeared on a plane in mid-flight, replacing 12 other passengers who vanished. And they all died 5 years ago in a plane crash. There's nothing normal about this situation. Thomas Wright from Transatlantic Airlines looked ill. If word gets out that our planes are being boarded by people who died in crashes, the panic alone could destroy the industry. We need to contain this situation immediately. Contain it how? I demanded. 12 families are going to be told their deceased loved ones are somehow back. 12 other families are going to be told their family members vanished on our flight. This isn't something we can hide. But even as I said it, I knew they were going to try. The government had ways of managing information, especially when that information might cause mass panic about the safety of air travel. Director Chen's expression confirmed my fears. For now, this stays classified. The 12 extra passengers will be held in secure medical quarantine for observation. Their families will be notified on a need-to-know basis, with national security protocols in place, and we'll continue investigating until we understand what happened. You can't just lock them up indefinitely. They haven't committed any crimes. They're not under arrest, Detective. They're being held for their own safety and for public safety until we can determine what they are and whether they pose any risk. I wanted to argue, but I understood the logic. What if these weren't really people? What if they were something else, copies, clones, some kind of manifestation? Until we understood what we were dealing with, releasing them could be dangerous. Over the next 48 hours, the 12 passengers underwent extensive medical and psychological testing. The results were consistently impossible. Physically, they were perfect matches for the crash victims from 2018, down to old scars and healed injuries documented in medical records. David Chen had a surgical scar from an appendectomy. In 2015 it was there on his body. Sarah Mitchell had a birthmark on her shoulder blade exactly where her medical files indicated it should be. But when we tried to take blood samples, things got strange. The needles would penetrate their skin, but no blood would flow. X-rays showed normal bone structure and organs, but the images were oddly flat, lacking the depth and detail of normal radiographs. It was like looking at a very good photograph rather than a three-dimensional scan. They're not entirely physical, Dr. Morrison concluded. They appear solid. They can interact with objects, but they're not made of normal matter. It's like they're projections, somehow existing in our space but not fully part of it. Projections from where? I asked. That's the question. I decided to focus on the 12 passengers who'd vanished, the ones actually booked on Flight 914, who'd somehow been replaced by our ghost passengers. Their families had reported them missing, and we were treating their disappearances as a potential kidnapping case, though I suspected something far stranger had occurred. The missing passengers were James Patterson, Seat 7C businessman from New York; Lisa Yamamoto, Seat 14A graphic designer from California; Robert Mills, Seat 31F retired professor from Texas; and 9 others, all confirmed to have boarded in London but never arrived in New York. I obtained their booking information and made a disturbing discovery. All 12 missing passengers had made their reservations exactly 5 years ago on the same day as the original bookings made by our ghost passengers, and the ticket numbers were sequential, as if they'd been booked in a batch. This wasn't random, I told Captain Hayes. Someone orchestrated this. Someone knew these 12 people would be on this flight, knew they'd be in these specific seats, and somehow arranged for them to be swapped with the crash victims. But why? What's the purpose? I had no answer. But I knew I needed to dig deeper into the original crash of Flight 702 in 2018. There had to be a connection, something that explained why those crash victims were returning now. I spent 2 days in federal archives, reviewing every document related to the 2018 crash. The official investigation had concluded it was mechanical failure, a catastrophic engine malfunction, that caused the plane to lose control and plunge into the Atlantic Ocean. The crash site was in deep water, and recovery efforts had been limited. Some debris was found, some bodies were recovered, but most of the wreckage and victims remained at the bottom of the ocean. But as I dug deeper into the investigation files, I found something troubling. 3 weeks before the official report was filed, there had been a dissenting investigator named Dr. Richard Vance who'd claimed the crash evidence didn't match a simple mechanical failure. He'd found anomalies in the recovered flight data recorder, strange readings that suggested something else had happened. Dr. Vance's concerns had been dismissed as speculation, and he'd been removed from the investigation team. His final report, buried in an appendix, suggested the possibility of unknown external interference with the aircraft. I tracked down Dr. Vance, now retired and living in Vermont. When I called him and explained why I was contacting him, there was a long silence on the line. "You're telling me passengers from Flight 702 have reappeared?" he finally said. "After 5 years. That's classified information, Dr. Vance. But yes, I need to know what you discovered back in 2018. What did you mean by unknown external interference? Can we meet in person? This isn't something I want to discuss over the phone." 2 days later, I was sitting in Dr. Vance's living room in rural Vermont, looking at files he'd kept, despite being ordered to destroy them. "The official story about Flight 702 is wrong," he said. "It wasn't mechanical failure. The plane was functioning normally right up until the moment it disappeared from radar. And I mean disappeared, it didn't gradually descend or show signs of distress. 1 second it was there, the next second it was gone from every tracking system simultaneously. That could be explained by a catastrophic structural failure. That's what they wanted people to think. But look at this." He showed me data from the flight recorder. "These readings are from the last 30 seconds before the crash. See these energy spikes? Those aren't normal. They're not engine fluctuations or electrical faults. There's something else entirely. What do you think they indicate?" "I think something reached out and grabbed that plane. Something with enough power to pluck a 400-ton aircraft out of the sky. And I think that same something has now sent back 12 of its passengers." "You're talking about something extraterrestrial or interdimensional." "I'm talking about the fact that we don't know everything about the universe we live in. There are phenomena we don't understand, forces we can't explain. Flight 702 encountered something, and now, 5 years later, it's returning its passengers. Why only 12? Why not all 287? I don't know. Maybe that's all it could manage. Maybe the others are truly gone. Or maybe they're waiting somewhere. And these 12 are just the first wave." I returned to New York with more questions than answers. But Dr. Vance had given me a new direction to pursue. If something had taken Flight 702, if our 12 passengers had been held somewhere for 5 years and then returned, there might be evidence of where they'd been. Dr. Morrison arranged for hypnotic regression therapy with our 12 passengers, hoping to recover memories they might not consciously recall. What emerged was disturbing and consistent across all their sessions. Sarah Mitchell remembered darkness. We were flying, and then everything went dark. Not like the lights went out, like existence itself went dark. And I felt like I was falling, but not through air, through something else, through emptiness that was more empty than empty should be. David Chen described voices. In that darkness, there were voices, not speaking words, but communicating somehow. They were studying us, trying to understand us. I felt like I was being taken apart and put back together, examined in every possible way. Rebecca Foster remembered others. There were more people in that dark place. Lots of them. I could sense them but not see them. Some were afraid, Some were resigned. We were all together, but separate, existing in that space that wasn't really a space. All 12 described variations of the same experience, being held in a void, examined by presences they couldn't identify, kept in a state of suspension, where time didn't flow normally. They'd experienced 5 years passing, but not in any conventional sense. Memories had been layered onto them, experiences that felt real but might have been artificial. It's like they were being prepared, Dr. Morrison said, given memories and experiences that would allow them to reintegrate into normal life. But the memories don't quite fit with actual reality. That's why they don't remember the crash. That memory was removed or replaced. They were meant to slot back into the world as if they'd never left. But why send them back at all? Why not just keep them, or let them truly die in the crash? Maybe returning them is part of the study. Maybe whatever took them wants to observe how they reintegrate, how their presence affects their families and society. We might all be part of the experiment. That thought was chilling. Were we being watched right now by whatever force had taken and returned these passengers? On the 5th day of quarantine, something happened that confirmed our worst fears. One of the 12 passengers, Michael Torres, began to destabilize. It started with his shadow reappearing. Medical staff noticed it during a routine examination. Suddenly, after 5 days of casting no shadow, Michael had one. But it wasn't quite right. It moved independently, delayed by a fraction of a second from his actual movements. Then his reflection appeared in mirrors, but the reflection didn't match his actions. When he raised his left hand, his reflection raised its right. When he smiled, his reflection frowned. "What's happening to me?" he asked, terrified, as his own shadow reached for him with hands he wasn't moving. Dr. Morrison tried to sedate him, but the sedatives passed through his body without effect. As if he wasn't entirely there to receive them, his form began to flicker, solid one moment, translucent the next, as if he was phasing between different states of existence. "They're pulling him back," Dr. Morrison said. "Whatever sent him here is recalling him." The other 11 passengers felt it too. They all reported a pulling sensation, a feeling that something was tugging at them, trying to draw them back to that dark void where they'd been held. "We don't want to go back," Sarah Mitchell pleaded. "Please, there has to be a way to anchor us here. We just want to go home, see our families, live our lives." But I didn't know how to fight against a force that could pluck planes from the sky and hold people in suspension for 5 years. We were dealing with something far beyond our understanding or control. Michael Torres flickered one final time, becoming almost completely transparent, his terrified eyes looking at us in desperate appeal. "Tell my family I love them," he managed to say. "Tell them I tried to come back." Then he was gone. Not dead, not collapsed, simply ceased to be there. One moment a flickering man begging for help, the next moment empty air. The remaining 11 passengers looked at each other in horror, knowing their time was limited too. "How long do we have?" David Chen asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we're going to try to find a way to keep you here, to make you real enough that whatever took you can't pull you back." It was a promise I wasn't sure I could keep, but I had to try, because these people had been through something no human should experience, and they deserved a chance to truly come home, even if home didn't quite know what to do with people who'd returned from the dead. Part 3. The vanishing. After Michael Torres disappeared, the remaining 11 passengers became increasingly desperate. They could feel the pull growing stronger, the sense that they were being drawn back to that void from which they'd emerged. We had perhaps days, maybe hours, before they all vanished like Michael. I called an emergency meeting with every expert I could assemble: physicists, quantum mechanics specialists, even a priest who'd studied theological implications of resurrection. We needed answers, and we needed them fast. Dr. James Park, a quantum physicist from MIT, studied the data we'd collected on our passengers. If I'm understanding correctly, these individuals exist in a superposition state simultaneously here and not here. Their quantum phenomena made manifest at a macro scale, which shouldn't be possible but clearly is. In English, please, Captain Hayes requested. They're like Schrödinger's cat, but with people. They exist in multiple states at once until observed and measured. The longer they interact with our reality, the more unstable that superposition becomes. Eventually, the quantum wave function collapses, and they resolve into a single state which appears to be their original state of death. So they're dying again? I asked. Or returning to death? They never fully left it. Whatever force took Flight 702 preserved them in a state between life and death, then tried to insert them back into life. But our reality is rejecting them, like a body rejecting a transplant. Is there any way to stabilize them? Make them fully alive and present? Dr. Park looked troubled. Theoretically, if we could anchor them to this reality with sufficient quantum entanglement, but I don't even know where to begin with that. We're talking about binding human consciousness to physical reality using technology that doesn't exist. Father Michael Chen, the priest I'd consulted, offered a different perspective. Perhaps this isn't a scientific problem at all. Perhaps what we're witnessing is souls that were taken before their time trying to return to life. In theology, we speak of resurrection as requiring divine intervention. These people can't simply will themselves back to life. They need something to anchor their souls to physical form. Their families, Dr. Morrison suggested. Could emotional connections serve as that anchor? If we reunited them with loved ones, would that attachment to life stabilize them? It was worth trying. Against the protests of federal officials who wanted to keep everything classified, I arranged 4 families to be brought in to see their supposedly deceased relatives. Sarah Mitchell's sister Emma was the first. She'd been told her sister died in 2018, attended the funeral, mourned for months. Now she was brought into a secured medical facility to see Sarah alive. The reunion was heartbreaking. Emma sobbed, reaching out to touch Sarah, as if she might be a hallucination. You're real. You're here. But they told us you died. They found we buried you. I know, Em. I know this doesn't make sense. But I'm here now. I'm back. They embraced, and for a moment, Sarah's form seemed to solidify. Her shadow darkened, became more defined. Her reflection in the observation window grew clearer. It's working, Dr. Morrison whispered. The emotional connection is creating some kind of resonance that's anchoring her to this reality. But then Emma pulled back slightly, looked at her sister more carefully. You're not the same. Something's different. Your eyes, they don't look right. And your skin, it feels cold. Sarah, what happened to you? Sarah's form flickered. Please, don't pull away. I need you to believe I'm real, to keep me grounded here. But you're not real, are you? Emma's voice broke. You're something else, something pretending to be my sister. The real Sarah died in that crash. The doubt, the withdrawal of belief and connection, had an immediate effect. Sarah became translucent again, her shadow fading. She reached desperately for her sister. No, please. I am real. I am Sarah. Don't let me go. But Emma backed away, terrified. I can't do this. I buried you. I mourned you. I moved on. You can't just come back and expect everything to be the same. Sarah screamed as she began to fade, calling her sister's name even as she became more and more transparent. Within seconds, she was gone, vanished like Michael before her. The experiment had failed. Worse than failed, it had accelerated the process. By confronting the impossibility of their return, by having loved ones doubt their existence, we'd made them less real, pushed them back toward the void that had held them. No more family reunions, Director Chen ordered. We're clearly making things worse. But the damage was done. The remaining 10 passengers had all witnessed Sarah's disappearance. They knew that even their family's love couldn't save them. The despair that settled over them seemed to accelerate their destabilization. Over the next 24 hours, 3 more vanished. David Chen disappeared while sleeping, fading away so gradually that monitoring equipment caught the entire process's form becoming transparent over the course of 10 minutes before finally ceasing to exist entirely. Rebecca Foster vanished mid-sentence while talking to Dr. Morrison, her final words hanging unfinished in the air. Thomas Wright went while eating lunch, his fork clattering to the table as his hand became too insubstantial to hold it. 7 passengers remained, and they were running out of time. There has to be something we're missing, I said to Dr. Park. Some connection we haven't identified. Why these specific 12 passengers? Why not others from the crash? Dr. Park had been reviewing the personal histories of all 12 original passengers. I think I found something. Look at this, all 12 of them were frequent flyers. They averaged more than 50 flights per year each. They spent more time in the air than almost any other passengers on that doomed flight, so they were comfortable with flying. How does that help? What if it's not about comfort with flying? What if it's about their literal connection to aircraft and aviation? These people spent hundreds of hours per year in planes, at airports, in that liminal space between ground and sky. They were more connected to aviation than almost anyone else on that flight, and that connection somehow made them candidates for return, I asked, or made them easier to reconstruct. Think about it, when something tried to recreate these passengers and send them back, it would need templates, patterns to follow. People who'd spent vast amounts of time in aircraft might have left stronger impressions, more data for whatever force this is to work with. It was a theory, but it didn't help us save the remaining 7. Unless, what if we strengthen their connection to aviation? I suggested, put them on a plane, surround them with the environment where they spent so much of their lives. Would that anchor them better than trying to return them to families who've moved on? Dr. Park looked thoughtful. It's possible. If their quantum state is tied to aviation environments, being in flight might stabilize them. Or it might do the opposite, return them to the state they were in during the crash. It's worth trying. We're losing them anyway. Director Chen was horrified by the proposal. You want to put potentially unstable quantum anomalies on a commercial flight. If they destabilize mid-air, not a commercial flight, I interrupted. A private charter. Just them, the crew, and monitoring equipment. We fly them over the same route as Flight 702. See if retracing their path helps stabilize their existence. It took 6 hours to range, and in that time we lost another passenger. Jennifer Walsh vanished while looking out a window at the airport, her form fading as she watched planes take off and land, as if the sight of aircraft reminded her too strongly of her own impossible nature. 6 passengers remained when we boarded the charter plane at midnight. The aircraft was a Boeing 777, the same model as Flight 702. We'd configured it with medical monitoring equipment and had Dr. Morrison, Dr. Park, and myself on board, along with a minimal crew. The 6 passengers, Lisa Yamamoto, Robert Mills, Catherine Durant, Andrew Foster, Michelle Park, and Gregory Stone, boarded quietly, their forms already beginning to flicker with instability. They knew this was a desperate last attempt. How long until we reached the coordinates where Flight 702 went down? I asked Captain Wilson, our pilot for this mission. About 4 hours. We're following the exact flight path of the original flight. As we took off and climbed to cruising altitude, I watched our 6 passengers carefully. The moment we were airborne, something changed. Their forms solidified slightly. Colors became more vivid. Shadows grew darker. It's working, Dr. Morrison said, checking her instruments. Their quantum signatures are stabilizing. Being in flight is anchoring them. For the next 3 hours, they seemed almost normal. They talked quietly among themselves, sharing their experiences of the past 5 days. Some cried. Some laughed nervously. They were people again, not fading phantoms. But as we approached the coordinates where Flight 702 had crashed 5 years ago, the Atlantic Ocean stretching dark and empty below us, everything changed. The plane's instruments began acting strangely. Compass needles spun wildly. GPS signals became unreliable. The lights flickered. And I felt that same sensation of disorientation the passengers had described, like reality itself. was becoming fuzzy. We're entering some kind of field, Doctor, Park said, his voice tight with tension. Energy readings are spiking off the charts. Detective, I think whatever took the original flight is still here. Through the cockpit window, I saw something impossible. The ocean below us was glowing with a faint blue-green luminescence. Not phosphorescence or reflected light, but something else. The water itself seemed to be rippling in ways that water shouldn't ripple. Patterns that hurt my eyes to look at. And then the 6 passengers all stood up simultaneously, moving to the windows with expressions of recognition and terror. It's here, Lisa Yamamoto whispered. The thing that took us. It's here, and it wants us back. The plane shuddered despite calm air. Something was pulling at us, trying to drag the aircraft down to the ocean below. Captain Wilson fought the controls, but I could see him struggling against a force that had nothing to do with aerodynamics. We need to turn back, he shouted. Now, before the lights went out, complete darkness filled the cabin, and in that darkness, I heard voices, not human voices, but something else. Something vast and incomprehensible trying to communicate. The 6 passengers were glowing now, their bodies becoming sources of light in the blackness. They were changing, transforming into something that wasn't quite human anymore. Detective Collins, Lisa's voice came through the darkness, but it didn't sound entirely like her anymore. We understand now. We understand what happened, what we are. Tell me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Flight 702 didn't crash. It was taken, pulled out of normal space by something that exists in the gaps between dimensions. It studies things, collects them, preserves them. We were specimens, samples of humanity kept in a state of suspension while it examined us. Why send you back? It didn't mean to. We were supposed to stay preserved forever. But something went wrong. Or maybe we found a way to push back, to remember who we were. 12 of us managed to create enough coherent memory and identity to manifest back in reality. We forced ourselves back into existence. Then why are you disappearing? Why can't you stay? Because we're not really alive anymore. We're memories, echoes, impressions of people who died 5 years ago. The thing that took us preserved our patterns, but not our actual substance. We're like recordings trying to play themselves back, but reality keeps trying to erase us because we don't belong here anymore. The glowing intensified, and I could see them clearly now, 6 human forms made of light. Beautiful and terrible at the same time. What about the 12 passengers who vanished from Flight 914? I asked. The ones you replaced. They're where we were. In the collection, being preserved. The thing that took us needed to balance the equation. 12 out means 12 in. It's how it maintains its collection. Can we get them back? Maybe, if someone goes to retrieve them, like we came back for ourselves. But it would require someone willing to enter that space, that gap between dimensions where nothing human should exist. I knew what she was implying. Someone would have to sacrifice themselves, enter that void to bring back the 12 missing passengers, and that someone was looking at me with ghostly, glowing eyes, waiting to see if I understood. What happens to you 6 if we don't try? I asked. We fade away, return to non-existence. We never really came back, we just borrowed some reality for a few days. But detective, we've had this time. We've been alive again, even if it was impossible. We've had a chance to understand what happened to us, to see the sky one more time. That's more than the others will get if no one helps them. The plane was still shaking, caught in whatever force field surrounded this area of ocean. Captain Wilson was barely maintaining control. How do I enter that space? I asked. How do I reach where they're being held? You don't go physically, Andrew Faster's glowing form said. You go consciously. Your body stays here, but your mind, your awareness, travels into that gap. We can show you the way. We can be your guides. Use what's left of our existence to create a bridge. And if I get lost in there, if I can't find my way back, then you'll be added to the collection, preserved forever like we were. But someone has to try, detective. Those 12 people deserve a chance to come home, truly come home, not as ghosts but as themselves. I thought about those 12 missing passengers, James Patterson, Lisa Yamamoto's counterpart, whose family was desperately searching for him. The others, all with lives interrupted, families waiting, futures stolen. Do it, I said. Show me the way. The 6 glowing forms moved closer, forming a circle around me. They placed their hands on my head, my shoulders, and I felt a sensation of falling, of being pulled out of my body and into somewhere else. The plane disappeared. The Atlantic Ocean disappeared. Reality itself disappeared. I was in the void they described. Absolute darkness that was somehow also absolute everything. I could sense presences here, vast and incomprehensible. The thing that collected and preserved, I felt it all around me, examining me with senses I didn't have words for. And there, in that impossible space, I saw them. 12 people frozen in moments of confusion and fear. The passengers who'd vanished from Flight 914, held in suspension, being studied by something that didn't understand it was causing suffering. I reached for them with my consciousness, my awareness, trying to pull them free, but they were trapped, bound by forces I couldn't comprehend. I needed help, needed the 6 who'd guided me here. We're here. Their voices came through the darkness. We'll help you break them free, but it will cost us. It will cost everything we have left. What do you mean? To free them, we have to give ourselves up completely. Use what remains of our existence as a key to unlock their prison. We'll be gone, truly gone, not even echoes anymore, but they'll be able to go home as themselves, fully alive, fully real. I understood. The 6 ghost passengers were offering to sacrifice their borrowed existence to save the 12 who'd been taken, to give up even the memory of themselves so that others might truly live. Are you sure? I asked. We died 5 years ago. Lisa's voice said gently. We've been dead all along. This week we've had this brief return to life. It was a gift. Now we can use that gift to help others. Please, detective, let us do this. Let us matter again. I felt tears on my face, though I wasn't sure if I had a face in this place. Thank you. For your courage. For your sacrifice. The 6 glowing presences moved past me, approaching the 12 frozen passengers. As they touched them, light exploded through the darkness, brilliant, beautiful light that somehow conveyed love, and hope, and the desperate desire to save others even at the cost of yourself. The 12 frozen passengers began to wake, to move, to become real again. And as they did, the 6 who'd guided me started to fade, not flickering or disappearing gradually like before, but dissolving into pure light that poured into the awakening 12. Tell them we were here, came a final whisper that might have been all 6 voices at once. Tell them we tried to come home, and tell them we're glad they get to actually make it. Then they were gone. Truly, finally gone, not existing anywhere, not even as memories or possibilities. They'd spent the last of themselves to free the others. The vast presence around me seemed to understand what had happened. I felt something like curiosity, like it was studying this concept of sacrifice it had witnessed. Then it released me, released all of us, sending us back to normal reality. I gasped, opening my eyes to find myself still on the plane, now in steady flight. The strange energy field was gone. The glowing ocean below had returned to normal darkness. And around me, 12 confused passengers were looking round, asking where they were and what had happened. Detective, Captain Wilson called from the cockpit. We just had 12 people appear in our cabin. They're the missing passengers from Flight 914. Where did they come from? They came home, I said quietly, with help from people who couldn't come home themselves. Part 4. The return. The 12 passengers we'd retrieved from that impossible space were disoriented and confused, but they were completely real. They cast shadows. They had reflections. When medical staff took their blood, it flowed normally. They were alive in every sense of the word, not quantum anomalies or ghostly echoes. The last thing I remember, James Patterson said as we flew back to New York, was boarding Flight 914 in London. I found my seat, put my bag in the overhead, sat down. And then I was here. Where are we? What happened? You've been missing for 5 days. I told him. Something took you. Held you in a kind of suspended state. But you're back now. You're safe. Over the course of the flight, I explained everything to the 12 return passengers about the 6 ghost passengers who'd manifested in their places, about the entity that collected and preserved things in that space between dimensions, about the sacrifice that had brought them home. So 6 people died to save us? Lisa Yamamoto asked, her eyes filling with tears. She shared a name with one of the ghost passengers, and learning about her counterpart's sacrifice affected her deeply. They died 5 years ago in Flight 702. I explained. What you're thinking of as death now was actually them spending the last of their borrowed existence to free you. They wanted you to have the chance at life they couldn't have. We should remember them, Robert Mills said. Tell their stories. Make sure people know what they did. But I knew that would be complicated. How do you tell the world about people who died in a crash 5 years ago, briefly came back as quantum anomalies, and then sacrificed themselves to save others? The government would classify it. The families would be confused and traumatized. The public would think it was a hoax or conspiracy theory. Still, I promised to try. Those 6 deserve to be remembered as heroes, not just as victims of a mysterious crash. When we landed at JFK, it was dawn. The 12 return passengers were immediately taken to a secure medical facility for examination and debriefing. Federal agencies descended on the situation, demanding explanations, trying to contain what they saw as a national security incident. But this time, I was prepared. Before we'd landed, I'd sent encrypted files to journalists, civil rights lawyers, and oversight committees, everything I documented about the ghost passengers, the entity that took Flight 702, and the sacrifice that had saved the 12. The government couldn't hide this without answering difficult questions. Director Chen was furious when she learned what I had done. You've compromised a classified operation and exposed information about phenomena we don't understand. People have a right to know. I shot back. 12 families had their loved ones taken. 6 people sacrificed everything to bring them back. The world deserves to know what happened, even if we don't fully understand it. And when panic spreads, when people are afraid to fly because they think some interdimensional entity might snatch their plane out of the sky, then we deal with that. But we deal with it honestly, not by hiding the truth. The story broke within hours. News outlets around the world covered it, the mysterious disappearance of 12 passengers, their return 5 days later, and the bizarre tale of 6 crash victims who'd briefly come back before disappearing forever. Reactions were mixed. Some called it a hoax, impossible science fiction. Others saw it as proof of government conspiracies or extraterrestrial contact. Religious groups debated the theological implications of people returning from death. But for the families involved, it was simply devastating and miraculous in equal measure. I was there when Sarah Mitchell's sister Emma was told that Sarah was truly gone. Not the living ghost who'd briefly appeared, but gone completely, having spent her final moments of existence saving someone else. I didn't believe she was real when I saw her, Emma sobbed. I pushed her away, and that might have helped kill her. I'll never forgive myself. Your doubt didn't kill her, I said gently. She was already fading, but she chose to spend what remained of her existence doing something heroic. She saved someone's life. That's how she wanted to be remembered. I want to meet them, Emma said. The person Sarah saved. The person who got to come home because my sister didn't. I arranged a meeting between Emma and James Patterson, who'd been in seat 7C, the seat Sarah's ghost had occupied. It was awkward and emotional, both of them struggling with the impossible situation. I don't remember her, James admitted. I don't remember anything from those 5 days. But I'm alive because of her, because of what she gave up. I don't know how to process that. Just live, Emma said, tears streaming down her face. Live well. Be happy. Make her sacrifice mean something. That's all I can ask. Similar meetings happened with other families, relatives of the 6 ghost passengers. Meeting the 12 who'd been saved. Some were angry, demanding to know why their loved ones hadn't been the ones to survive. Others were grateful, seeing their deceased family members' final act as heroic. Dr. Vance, the investigator who'd been dismissed after claiming Flight 702 was taken by something unknown, was vindicated. He was brought back to consult on the official investigation, though I suspected much of what he discovered would remain classified. I always knew something took that plane, he told me, but I never imagined the passengers might try to come back, or that some of them would succeed even temporarily. This changes everything we understand about consciousness and death. What do you think happened to the other 275 passengers and crew from Flight 702? I asked. The ones who didn't manage to manifest like our 6. I think they're still there, in that collection, preserved in whatever form that entity uses to study things. Maybe someday we'll figure out how to retrieve them too. But for now, he looked sad. For now, they're lost in a place we can barely comprehend, let alone access. The official investigation into Flight 702 was reopened, this time acknowledging that the crash wasn't a simple accident. Families of the victims were told a carefully worded version of the truth, that something had taken the plane, that most passengers remained missing, but that 6 had attempted to return and had sacrificed themselves saving others. It wasn't the closure they wanted, but it was more honest than the lie they'd been told 5 years ago. Transatlantic Airlines faced a crisis of confidence. Passengers were afraid to fly, worried that planes might be snatched out of the sky by incomprehensible forces. The airline implemented new monitoring systems, working with scientists to try to detect the kind of energy signatures we'd encountered over the crash site. Other airlines followed suit. Aviation authorities worldwide issued new protocols for responding to unexplained phenomena during flights. It was a massive shift in how we thought about air travel. For me, the case became defining. I was promoted, given authority to investigate similar incidents if they occurred. I became the government's go-to expert on what they called aviation anomalies. But mostly, I thought about those 6 people who tried to come home. Sarah Mitchell, who died before really living. David Chen, whose final act was to help guide me into that void. Rebecca Foster, who'd wanted nothing more than to see her husband again. Michael Torres, the first to fade, accepting his fate with courage. Jennifer Walsh, who'd vanished while watching planes, perhaps seeing in them a reflection of her own impossible nature. And Thomas Wright, who tried so hard to hold on, to stay real, to matter. They'd all mattered. They'd all been real, even if only for a few days. And in those days, they'd shown more courage and compassion than most people show in a lifetime. I arranged for a memorial service to be held, bringing together families of the 6 ghost passengers and the 12 they'd saved. It was unofficial, not sanctioned by any government agency, just people gathering to honor those who'd given everything. Emma Mitchell spoke about her sister. Sarah tried to come home. She didn't quite make it, but she tried. And when she realized she couldn't stay, she made sure someone else could. That's who my sister was, someone who thought of others even in her darkest moments. James Patterson spoke about what it meant to be saved by someone you'd never met. I'm living a life that someone else paid for with the last of their existence. Every day I have now is because of Sarah Mitchell and 5 others whose names I'm still learning. I don't know if I deserve this chance, but I'm going to try to make it worth what they gave. The service ended with a moment of silence for the 6 ghost passengers, and the 275 others from Flight 702 who remained lost. It felt inadequate, insufficient to honor what had happened, but it was something. Afterward, Dr. Morrison approached me. Detective, I've been analyzing the data from our time in that void. One thing I understand something about why those 6 were able to manifest. What did you find? They were all people who'd spent enormous amounts of time in transit, in planes, in airports, in that liminal space between places. They existed so much in that in-between state during life. that when they were taken to a place outside normal reality, they somehow retained more coherence than others. They were used to being nowhere, so they could survive better in a place that wasn't anywhere. And the others, the 275 who didn't come back, they're probably still preserved, still existing in that collection, but they're more fragmented, less able to maintain coherent identity. Bringing them back would be complicated, but possible. Maybe, with the right technology, the right approach. We'd need to understand so much more about that entity and the space it occupies. It could take decades of research. Then we start researching, I said, because those people deserve a chance to come home too. Even if we can't save them all, we have to try. And so began a new chapter in my life, studying the impossible, trying to understand forces that defied comprehension, working toward the day when we might be able to retrieve the rest of Flight 702's passengers and crew from their prison between dimensions. It was work that would consume years, maybe my entire remaining career. But it felt important, necessary. Those 6 ghost passengers had shown me something profound about the nature of sacrifice and hope. The least I could do was honor their memory by trying to help others the way they'd helped those 12. Every time I flew after that, I looked out the window and wondered if somewhere in the darkness between the stars, in spaces we couldn't see or measure, there were other collections of lost travelers, other planes that had been taken, other people held in suspension, waiting for someone to find a way to bring them home. And I promised myself that as long as I had breath and consciousness, I would keep looking for them. Because that's what the 6 ghost passengers had taught me, that even when you're barely existing, when you're nothing but an echo of who you were, you can still choose to matter. You can still choose to help. You can still choose to sacrifice yourself for others. They'd tried to come home, and in failing, they'd helped others succeed. That was worth remembering, worth honoring, worth continuing. The case of Flight 914 and its 12 extra passengers officially remained unexplained, classified under national security protocols. But those who knew the truth carried it with them, a reminder that reality was stranger and more wonderful than we imagined. And somewhere in that vast darkness where Flight 702 still existed in some form, 275 souls waited, preserved in a collection maintained by something we barely understood, hoping that someday, someone would find a way to bring them home. I intended to be that someone, however long it took. Part 5. The final truth. 3 years passed after the return of the 12 passengers. In that time, I had assembled a team of scientists, physicists, and consciousness researchers dedicated to understanding the phenomenon that had taken Flight 702 and studying ways to retrieve the remaining passengers. We called it Project Homecoming, DR. Park led the physics team, building instruments that could detect the energy signatures we'd encountered over the crash site. Drive. Morrison worked on consciousness studies, trying to understand how awareness could be separated from physical form and protected during transit through that void space. But our real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Her name was Maya Chen, a theoretical physicist who'd been just a graduate student when Flight 702 crashed. She'd lost her mother on that flight and had spent the past 8 years studying quantum mechanics and consciousness, driven by the need to understand what had happened. I think I know what that entity is, Maya told me during a meeting in our secure research facility. It's not a being in the way we understand beings. It's more like a natural phenomenon, a kind of cosmic eddy where dimensions intersect. She pulled up diagrams that hurt my eyes to look at mathematical representations of multi-dimensional space. Our universe has multiple dimensions beyond the 3 spatial and 1 temporal dimension we experience. Most of the time, these dimensions are separate, distinct, but in certain locations, under certain conditions, they can overlap, create a space where multiple dimensional states exist simultaneously. And Flight 702 flew into one of these overlaps. Exactly. The plane didn't crash in our conventional sense, it transitioned into that overlap space. And once there, it became preserved in a state that exists across multiple dimensional frameworks. The entity you encountered isn't collecting things deliberately. It's more like things get caught in that dimensional eddy, the way debris gets caught in a whirlpool. Can we navigate that space? Go in and retrieve the passengers? Theoretically, yes. But it would require technology we're only beginning to develop. We'd need a way to stabilize someone's quantum state while transferring their consciousness through dimensional barriers. And we'd need a beacon. Something to help them find their way back. What kind of beacon? Maya hesitated. Something emotionally significant. Something that represents home so strongly that it can serve as an anchor across dimensions. For the 6 who managed to manifest briefly, their beacon was probably their own desperate desire to return. But for the others, who've been fragmented and preserved for years, we'd need something more powerful. Over the next year, we worked on building what Maya called a quantum anchor, a device that could project emotional resonance across dimensional boundaries. We gathered items from families of the missing passengers' photographs, beloved objects, recorded messages and incorporated them into the anchor's matrix. The theory was that if we could create a strong enough emotional signal, the preserved passengers might be able to latch onto it and use it to pull themselves back to our reality. It was desperate, unproven science, but it was our best chance. The test was scheduled for November 7th, 2024, 6 years to the day after Flight 702 had vanished. We chartered a plane to fly over the crash coordinates, bringing with us the quantum anchor and a team of volunteers, willing to risk entering that dimensional overlap if necessary. I was one of the volunteers. After everything I'd experienced, I felt responsible for seeing this through to the end. As we approached the coordinates at midnight, the instruments began registering the same energy signatures we detected 3 years earlier. The ocean below us started glowing with that eerie blue-green light. Activating quantum anchor, Maya announced. The device hummed to life, and I felt something shift in the air around us, a subtle vibration that seemed to resonate in my chest. Through the windows, the dimensional overlap became visible, a region where space itself looked twisted, folded in ways that shouldn't be possible. Our plane entered it, and reality became strange. I saw multiple versions of our plane overlapping, existing in slightly different positions simultaneously. I saw the ghost images of Flight 702, flickering in and out of existence, still flying its doomed path across multiple timelines. And I saw them, the 275 passengers and crew, preserved in that space between dimensions, frozen in the moment of their taking. The anchor is working, Dr. Park reported, his voice filled with wonder. They're responding. Their quantum signatures are strengthening. One by one, the preserved passengers began to materialize on our plane. Not all at once, the process was gradual, difficult, as if they were pulling themselves through resistant medium. But they were coming through. An elderly woman appeared first, looking around in confusion. Where am I? I was on my flight to see my daughter. Then a businessman, a young couple, a mother with 2 children, more and more of them, manifesting from that impossible space, returning to reality through sheer force of will and the emotional pull of the anchor. But something was wrong. The dimensional overlap was becoming unstable. Our instruments showed energy levels spiking dangerously. The overlap is collapsing, Maya shouted. We're bringing through too many people too fast. It's destabilizing the entire region. How many have we retrieved? I asked. 215. But there are still 60 more trapped in there, and if the overlap collapses completely, we'll never be able to reach them again. I made a decision that still haunts me. Get everyone we've retrieved to safety. Fly them out of the overlap zone now. What about you? I'm going in after the others. Someone has to stay and guide them through before it's too late. Before anyone could stop me, I activated the consciousness transfer protocol that Dr. Morrison had developed. My body stayed on the plane, but my awareness entered that dimensional overlap, diving into the space where the final 60 passengers remained trapped. It was like my first journey into that void, but worse. The collapse was accelerating, and I could feel reality fragmenting around me. I reached for the trapped passengers, pulling them toward the anchor's signal, urging them to push through. Follow my voice. I called out with whatever passed for voice in that place. Follow the feeling of home. Your families are waiting. Your lives are waiting. Push through. One by one, they responded. I felt them moving, fighting against the preservation that held them, using the last of their strength to reach toward reality. 40 made it through, then 50, then 55. But 5 remained, too fragmented or too deep in the collapse to reach the anchor's signal. I tried to go deeper, to reach them, but the dimensional overlap was coming apart around me. Detective, you need to get out now. Maya's voice came through the connection. Another 30 seconds and the overlap will close completely. You'll be trapped there forever. I can't leave them. 5 more people. I just need 20 seconds. I reached desperately for the 5 remaining passengers, felt them just beyond my grasp. So close, but the dimensions were separating, the space collapsing. 10 seconds. I had to choose. Die trying to save 5 more, or retreat and live knowing I'd left them behind. The 6 ghost passengers had taught me about sacrifice, but they'd also taught me that sometimes, surviving to continue the fight was important too. I pulled back, letting my consciousness return to my body, just as the dimensional overlap collapsed. The strange energy field vanished, the glowing ocean returned to normal darkness, and reality stabilized. We'd retrieved 270 passengers and crew from Flight 702. 5 remained lost, probably forever. The rescue operation was hailed as a miracle. Though most of the world never learned the true details, the retrieved passengers had to undergo months of reintegration therapy, learning to cope with having lost 6 years of their lives. Families had to adjust to welcoming back loved ones who'd been mourned and buried long ago. It was messy and complicated and sometimes painful, but they were home. They were alive. They had a second chance. I visited Maya's mother, Dr. Patricia Chen, who'd been one of the retrieved passengers. She had no memory of being preserved in that dimensional overlap, just a sense of lost time and confusion. But she was grateful, overjoyed to be reunited with her daughter. "Thank you," she said to me, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for not giving up on us." But I thought about the 5 we'd left behind. 5 people still trapped in that collapsed dimensional space, if they still existed at all. Their names haunted me. Robert Singh, Annie Martinez, Thomas Wright, a different Thomas from the ghost passenger, Jennifer Santos, and Marcus Lee. Dr. Park believed the dimensional overlap wouldn't reform for at least another decade, possibly longer. And when it did, would those 5 still be there? Would they be recoverable? Or had we missed our only chance to save them? It's a question I live with every day. The case of Flight 702 officially concluded with the recovery of 270 passengers. Memorial services were held for the 5 who remained lost, and the 12 who died in the original taking. The bodies of 6 had been recovered from the crash site years ago, and were now confirmed to have died in the initial incident, while the 6 ghost passengers were remembered as having briefly returned. Before their final sacrifice, I received commendations, awards, recognition for my work. But what mattered most was the families reunited, the lives restored, the impossible made possible through science, courage, and sacrifice. 3 years later, on the anniversary of the rescue, I stood at a memorial erected over the coordinates where Flight 702 had vanished. It was a floating monument, anchored to the ocean floor, bearing the names of all who'd been lost and all who'd been saved. Maya stood beside me. She'd continued her research, developing even more sophisticated instruments for detecting dimensional anomalies. "We'll get another chance," she said. "When the overlap reforms, we'll be ready. We'll get those 5 home." You believe that? I have to. Because my mother believes it. Because the families of those 5 deserve hope. Because we've already accomplished the impossible once. Why couldn't we do it again? I looked out at the ocean, remembering everything that had happened here. The ghost passengers who'd briefly returned. The 12 who'd been swapped and saved. The 270 we'd retrieved. The 5 who remained lost. Tell me, Maya said quietly, when you were in that dimensional overlap, did you see it? The thing that preserves and collects. I sensed something vast, but I couldn't understand it, couldn't comprehend its nature or purpose. Do you think it meant any harm? Or was it just existing? And we happened to get caught in something we weren't equipped to understand. I thought about that question, one I'd been pondering for years. I think it's like you said, a natural phenomenon, not malicious but not benevolent either. Just a fact of how reality works in ways we're only beginning to grasp. We flew through a place where dimensions meet, and got caught in the intersection. But we also found a way out. That's what matters. We stood in silence, watching the sun set over the water. Somewhere below, in the deep ocean, debris from Flight 702 still rested on the seafloor, the physical remains of a plane that had been simultaneously destroyed and preserved, existing in multiple states across multiple realities, until we'd found a way to retrieve most of its passengers. It was the most impossible case I'd ever investigated, the most impossible case anyone had ever investigated. But we'd solved it. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to bring hundreds of people home. Enough to prove that even when reality itself becomes strange and terrible, human courage and ingenuity can find a way through. The 6 ghost passengers had started this journey, trying desperately to come home and sacrificing everything. When they realized they couldn't fully make it, their courage had inspired everything that followed: the research, the rescue mission, the retrieval of 270 people from an impossible prison. I like to think they knew, somehow, that their sacrifice hadn't been in vain, that their brief return and final gift had led to so many others finding their way home. The Extra Passengers, Detective Story in 5 parts.